so lovely to be here tonight. What a beautiful life. Give yourself some round of applause. You're so lovely.
Today, I want to tell the story of a football player by the name of Richie Incognito. For those who don't know, again, he's a football player who's had a pretty long and I think you could say tumultuous career as a player on and off the field. Richie Incognito was a standout player as an offensive lineman in high school. He was all-state, very great player, heavily recruited. He ended up signing with the University of Nebraska, which, if you know football, Nebraska is renowned for having really good linemen and also good running backs. So he came into the University of Nebraska. It's a really big deal. They're very excited about him. And after redshirting his first year, his freshman year, he went into his second year as a starter, made the all-freshman team, and performed the way you would expect from a guy who was so heralded coming in. Now, he did have a couple minor incidents that second year, which included spitting on a player from another team, and he was also ejected for fighting against Penn State. Besides that and a few scuffles in practice, nothing that anyone would consider too unusual had happened just yet. That's until 2003, where during practice he had a fight with a teammate that was bad enough that he was actually suspended indefinitely from the team. At that point, the people in Nebraska were so worried about him that they actually sent him to a facility in Kansas for professional anger management treatment. After he went through the treatment, they allowed him back onto the team, and he went on to perform well, as he always does on the field, until the following year when he got into a fight at a party off campus, and he was charged with 3 counts of assault. This was followed by another fight in his own locker room with a teammate, and this was the final straw, and the University of Nebraska had finally had enough, and despite the fact that he was one of the best linemen in the nation, they removed his scholarship, and he was kicked off the team. Now, when you can play football as well as Richie Incognito, then there will always be people who want your services. So, of course, he immediately transferred to the University of Oregon. He was dismissed by the University of Oregon after only a week. So he only made it a week with the team before they cut him loose too. And the reasons behind that were never given. But he ended his college career by having 2 teams say, we'd rather not have this guy around, despite the fact that he's a really good football player. So at this point, he enters the NFL draft. He goes to the draft combine. And again, Richie Incognito is a big guy. He's quick. He's agile. He's strong as an ox. So, of course, he tests well all the way across the board. And he's also a smart guy. So he tests well across the board at the NFL combine. Even though a few teams, one of them being the Indianapolis Colts, who were coached at that time by Tony Dungy, put him on the do not draft list, meaning that they didn't care if he had the best combine of all time. They felt like his character issues were too great. But that was just one team. There's plenty of other teams that will find space for a big hulking lineman with linebacker speed. And so, of course, he was drafted in the 3rd round by the Rams. So his career with the Rams started off normal enough. He was a regular contributor. He did deal with some nagging injuries, but for the most part, you would say he performed well. He did have incidents on the field, and for a 3-year stretch from 06 to 09, he was actually the most penalized player in the league, and that includes personal fouls and every other kind of infraction. Well, eventually, after he had an incident with a coach during the game, he was actually benched twice during his last season with the Rams, and then the Rams cut him. And they said, we've given you plenty of chances. We look past the checkered background, but you keep being a problem. So now he's been released by 2 colleges, and he's been released by the team that drafted him. But of course, he wasn't without a job for long, because the Buffalo Bills came calling. They picked him up for the rest of that season. He finished the season with them. He played very well. But after the season, Buffalo declined to re-sign Richie Incognito. So at that point, Miami comes calling, and he goes to Miami, and this is where he was an absolute revelation. Because in Miami, for the first time ever, he made the first of, I believe, 4 Pro Bowls, performing as well as anyone in the league. And believe it or not, in 2012, he actually received the Good Guy Award, which is an award that the local media gives out to someone for making the media's job easier. So again, He was given yet another chance at redemption, and it looked like this time he was finally getting it right. Well, that's until the year after he received the Good Guy Award, when a teammate, Jonathan Martin, left the team because of persistent bullying. And after an investigation, it turns out that Richie Incognito was one of the people who was harassing his fellow teammate. He actually was harassing him with racial slurs. He also was using racial slurs against an Asian team worker. At one point, he texted someone that he had bought a gun that was perfect for shooting black people. And these were the kind of interactions he was having with his teammate. And this caused the Miami Dolphins to suspend him indefinitely and eventually release him as well. So now we're up to the fourth team that is chosen to part ways with Richie Incognito, despite all of his football talent. So from there, he actually goes back to Buffalo. And when he goes back to Buffalo, yet again, Richie Incognito is a revelation on the field because he went back to his Pro Bowl status and performed as well as any lineman in the league. That is until 2017, when he decided to retire, saying that he was suffering from kidney failure and attributing that to the stress and everything else that comes with being a professional football player. Now, the funny thing about that is when he retired from the Bills, he made that announcement on social media. The Buffalo Bills front office was so worried that he might do something crazy that they actually put the team staff on alert to let them know if he came back to the facility. And they increased security at the Buffalo Bills facility just in case Richie Incognito did something crazy. That's how worried they were that he might do something. But he didn't, thankfully. And he was away from football in 2018. And he was off the radar until he walked into a gym and had a meltdown that included him insisting that he was working for the government and that people were spying on him. He allegedly hit someone with a weight sled, threw weights into the pool, made threats against the staff and the other gym members, and he was eventually arrested and put on an involuntary psychiatric hold because the police determined that he was a threat to both other people and himself. He was eventually released from this psychiatric hold, and he was off the radar again, at least for a couple months, until the death of his father, when he was charged with domestic violence against his 90-year-old grandmother, because he went to her house and he blamed his grandmother for his father's death, punched a hole in the wall, and ripped her security unit off the wall. Then, a few days after that, he went to the funeral home and immediately made a huge scene, which included him punching caskets. He threatened to shoot the workers at the funeral home with the guns that he had in his car. He allegedly at one point talked about wanting to remove his father's head for research purposes. And again, he was arrested for terrifying everyone. So that was the last we had heard of Richie Incognito until a few days ago, when after a year away from football and several pending charges, the Oakland Raiders called Richie Incognito and brought him in on a 1-year prove-it contract, as they call it. So despite everything, despite having issues with every single team he's been on, with teammates, with team staff, the front office, fans, anyone you can think of, they called him again, and Richie Incognito will receive yet another opportunity to play in the National Football League. When the general manager of the Raiders was asked why would you give a guy like Richie Incognito another chance, his response was, you can't have all Boy Scouts. So that means the Richie Incognito story continues. So I guess it's a great thing that Richie Incognito wasn't a black guy that turned on TV and noticed the pattern of cops killing other black people and not being prosecuted for it. Because if he did that and had the audacity to take a knee in protest, because if he did that and took a knee in protest, there would never be the long, winding story of Richie Incognito, because the opportunities would have stopped right there. He would never have had a chance to redeem himself over and over and over again. But Richie Incognito did not protest police violence. He did not stand up for people who were being killed. No, he just menaced and terrorized nearly everyone he's come into contact with professionally over the course of his entire career. And the long, winding saga of Richie Incognito continues with the Oakland Raiders. I wonder what he will do next. And they wonder why we kneel.